Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. This is part 2 with John Raymer. If you missed his first episode, it would be great to go back to episode 60. So what's number 2?
The next single most important leadership character trait that I think a person has to have, no matter what your role, you have to have integrity. And what people perceive of your personal integrity is vital to being a sought-out leader. And you remember, being truly effective requires that people are constantly seeking you out and that they respect your insights. And if people aren't doing that, you're probably not as effective as you thought. About a leader or someone that you knew that lacked integrity. Perhaps someone that didn't have your back. Somebody that talked about other people behind their backs. Maybe somebody that said one thing and then did another while they were away from you. Something totally different. There are seemingly countless examples of this with prominent people in the news who lack integrity. And ask yourself, would you seek that person out for anything? Would you work for them? Would you confide in them?
And does that come back to people see who you are? Because I can remember just saying things because it's the right thing to say, and then all of a sudden, well, hey, you never got back to me, or we never did that program you were talking about. And you can be inspirational, but you can't do that with integrity if you're not coming through. So what's your story here, John? Where did integrity come from for you?
Well, integrity was taught to me by my mother. I wish I could say that I was always successful. Obviously, I'm not. And lapses in integrity can be innocuous. They can be unintentional. And I recall once I was working in a team. It's at a chemical company, and I said some things, negative things about somebody on the team, behind their back. And it wasn't that I was trying to really insult the guy or anything like that. We were just kind of all talking, and again, it's kind of innocuous. I could have. But I did have an issue with the guy, and I could have addressed it one-on-one with him, but I made the mistake really not to. A year and a half later, I was promoted to the same leadership role as the team leader. My teams didn't function well. They didn't ask me any questions. It didn't seem like they were stepping up for anything. I can remember sitting in the office on the floor and just countless hours, and they're lonely hours, and I'm trying to think to myself, why don't people respond to me? I'm a swell guy. I'm super approachable. We go way back now. I really care about their livelihood. And one day, the same guy that I had been talking to, he kind of took pity on me, I guess. He could see that we were failing. And he let me know, the team thinks you're two-faced and they don't trust me. What do you mean? Ooh. What have I ever done to earn that kind of reputation? And he reminded me that people think that I talk about them behind their back and that I'm not, up front engaging them about their issues or they're not celebrating their successes, et cetera. I consider myself to be the opposite of that. Sometimes when you take those character skills traits tests, those can be really revealing about people seeing you the way you are, even when you can't. And that's a tool that I've used several times in different roles when I've struggled. But I think as a leader, it's really important to avoid these big pitfall type moments, especially with something like humility or integrity. Recovery can take forever, and it might be never. And I've been in groups where people never forgave me for dumb things that I did, even though I asked for, I apologized for it and asked for some understanding. It takes a lot of introspection. It took a lot of eating crow, perhaps with this group. They were kind of a particular type of group. It wasn't true. I had made the error, but it wasn't true who they thought I was. But I lost a lot of time. I lost a lot of human capital. It cost me a lot of pain and maybe
Yeah.
a year and a half of success because people saw me who I really was and not who I thought I was.
So the old John maybe should be listening to this podcast as well. In your past life. Yeah, two-faced.
Two-faced.
That's
John
tough.
Wren. That's tough because I'm not.
Ooh.
You know, I don't. Well, at least I say I'm not, but they see me who I really was. So it was something that I had to work. And I think it's really important to avoid those big landmines because, like I said, you can get in a particular group of people and never regain their trust on that. And you can't be an effective leader if they don't think that you have integrity.
And there we go. It comes back to people see who you are, even if you don't. So what I'm hearing, John, is that we have the whole mindfulness aspect of we know who we are and we can't worry about everyone judging us. But I think the lesson here, because it's a story, so it's okay to have a lesson because we already told the story. And what I'm kind of learning listening to you is that the two-faced thing is not really about what you think, it's how you make other people feel. And that whole aspect of it doesn't matter who you think you are because who you are is how you make people feel.
And one thing that you do with one person, obviously I can assure you, it will go throughout the group. The people that work for you, they see you, who you are, and they talk about who you are, and they talk to each other. So again, something that's innocuous that you think, maybe I've got a special relationship with this one person, I can tell them things or whatever. I can assure you it's not. Integrity is integrity. You either have it or you don't have it. And if you carry yourself in such a way or you do things that show a lack of integrity or a lack of respect for someone else, I assure you that other people will think that. It's not just the one person that you're talking to because people talk about who they work for.
That is a skill of leadership today. If you can ask those questions sometimes, like, how am I doing? How am I showing up? How am I making you feel? Then some of those things may come out earlier than it did maybe for you and I, because we had to wait for that person that felt bad for us and had the courage to come tell us. And that is the game changer if you choose to. Not everybody is really interested in that feedback because they just want to keep going. But for anybody that's listening, I know you're not in that state. And maybe that's just one call to action coming off of today's podcast.
Well, I'll give you another example regarding integrity. So I've always carried myself as a moral person and a Christian person. In manufacturing, you can get into a lot of situations where there's especially in a highly automated type of manufacturing, where there's a ton of pressure from a lot of different angles coming down. And I can recall being in those situations many, many, many times. And early in my career, I can remember getting angry. I can remember even swearing. Now, I'm not talking about cussing like a sailor. I'm just talking about expletives or whatever that comes out. Mm-hmm. I recall an HR manager once pulled me aside and requested, in a nice way, he was able to say the words, he requested that I didn't swear on the floor in front of people that worked for me. And I'm thinking to myself, what in the world are you talking about? I don't swear, blah, 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 blah. But he saw it as a conflict of integrity, whereas I carried myself as a Christian man, and I tried to treat people right, but it was in a direct conflict to what people see. And he let me know that there were many people that worked for me that wish that in those situations that I didn't get so out of control that I was actually using a cuss word or something. So that was some really good feedback to where people were questioning my integrity, thinking, he says he's one thing, but he's not another.
It's rare when you find leaders, and there's some that get away with it. I think of Gary Vaynerchuk's a very popular leader who, and I do learn lots from him. He gets away with it. But I would just say in manufacturing, from what I've seen, never usually do the two correlate. Man, that person's a really sincere leader. I love how much they swear. And I had somebody ask me before, I was in a plant and people were swearing a lot. And this woman was a very highly skilled, sought after trainer in the industry, and she's like, Trevor, what do you think about the swearing? Does it belong in world-class manufacturing?
Again, most people won't say it. They'll think it, and they'll draw their conclusions of who you are, but they really aren't going to say anything to you. And I was happy that, I was grateful that an HR manager took the time to give me 2 minutes of a lesson that I needed to learn and keep for the rest of my days. So,
Thank goodness.
yes.
So look for that person today. Who do you have that maybe can be your truth teller? And you can figure out a little bit more of how people are seeing you, who you are, and then you can see the same.
The old story about a man interviewing for a job, and during the interview had used a couple of colorful words. And at the end of the interview, he asked if he was going to get the job, and the interviewer said no. And the reason is because of your language. And he said, well, I can clean that up. I won't say that in front of people. And the interviewer says, I was looking for the person that wouldn't have said them in the first place.
Oh,
And that's an integrity question, right? You either have it or you don't.
Fantastic. That's that whole concept of, well, I'm like this at work, but at home I'm different.
Right. I turn it off.
Well, why? Like, did you switch out minds and bodies and souls when you walked out the door? I never understood that.
That's because you aren't who you say you are or who you want to portray. And you need to work on it. And we all have things to work on, right? We all have them.
Not who you want to portray.
Yeah, again, you can have a lot of issues with your leadership style and your leadership ability, but without these four foundational, you're not going to make a lot of progress. And the third one is empathy. And if you want to fail as a leader, then allow your people to think that you really don't care. And make sure that they don't take time, that you don't take time to learn who they are, and make sure you don't learn what's important to them and what trials they may face personally. I've got a lot of experience in this through the years. To be really effective, you have to invest in your relationships with people. It's the biggest mistake in the world to think that your job is so big that you don't have time to spend with your people. Mm-hmm. You have to make time with your people, otherwise you don't have a job. I'll also, and everybody knows this isn't rocket scientist, but most people that work for you don't live charmed lives. And if you think your life is really complicated, chances are there's a lot of people that work for you that have a lot of problems that are far more dire than what you face in your life. And I can recall once, I worked with this gentleman for more than 10 years. And this is a man who came to work every day, always smiled, was very well thought of and very well respected, was always approachable, and always seemed to care about other people. After 10 years, one day, I learned out of the blue that he had a severely handicapped son that was 9 years old, and that he and his wife were really struggling with their day-to-day life and finances and how to deal with all that. And you talk about feeling ineffective, my God, that it explained a lot about me and about my level of empathy and about how I hadn't invested any time with him at all. I always felt like I was super empathetic, just certain commercials make me tear up and blah, blah, blah. And here I'm working with a man for 10 years, and he has, one of the biggest burdens that a couple can carry on his back. So that was an eye-opener for me about being so sucked into a job that I didn't know who I was working with, and obviously was not seen as an empathetic person. I hadn't taken time. There was another time. I had taken a new job, and one night, it was in my probation period, during the first 6 months, and the place that I was working at had a policy: if you had any attendance issues in the first 6 months, you were automatically terminated. And back then it mattered. I think maybe today it's a little bit more lenient, but back then they really did. They just fired people if you didn't come to work or if you were late. Mm-hmm. Obviously, in today's post-pandemic world, you can't do that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have anybody working for you. One night, I got a call from my wife, and there was a serious medical issue going on within the family, and I had to leave. There was no question about whether or not I could go, or I had to leave. I told my supervisor that I needed to go and that there was an medical emergency within the house. He reminded me, without missing a beat, that I was still in my probation period, and that any attendance issues could be grounds for termination.
Yeesh.
And here's my wife in the hospital, and I'm standing there. It's 1:00 in the morning, and I'm looking at my supervisor which I had just lost all respect for, and wondering about the company that I was working for that would have a supervisor that had such lack of empathy. So I let him know that I guess that means I'm fired, and I left. And I called back the next day. I talked to his boss. I let him know why I quit, and that I understood the policy and all that, and it just couldn't be avoided. Well, his supervisor was a far more empathetic person and a far more savvy leader. He asked me to come in to work, and he worked with myself and the supervisor that had so callously sent me on my way. And we all sat down and talked. And for the supervisor, it was a learning moment for his leadership style, in that his lack of empathy was really going to be a real derailer for his career. So I was able to stay in the job. I think,
Yeah, we get stories that impact us personally, and then we have the stories that we've impacted somebody else, and they're both important.
I can remember once I was a manager. I had an assistant manager, and his wife, unbeknownst to me, was slowly dying of cancer. And I hadn't known about his wife because, quite honestly, I hadn't invested time with him. I didn't know the man, even though I should have. And by the time I found out about her condition, she was in her last days. And she was also slowly passing away in a cancer center. It was 500 miles away. Embarrassingly, I got to fess up here. I found out about his wife dying or getting ready to die when I was asking him about his attendance issues on the phone. So I was mortified that I was so empathetic. Anyway, I thought to myself, what an ass of a boss. That's how he had to have thought about me, right? Anyway, after work, I went to the airport, got on a plane, and flew to that city. And I met with this assistant manager and told him that I wanted to take his 2 children off his hands because, to allow him to be with his wife the last couple of days. So I don't know why he trusted me enough, but
Wow.
he gave me his kids. And I set him up in a hotel for a couple of days. We went to an amusement park, and we went to a couple of kid-oriented type places. The kids were struggling with this as well.
Of course.
Their mom's passing away. They know she's passing away. This has been a protracted, serious illness. But they're also seeing her dad struggle. And they're probably wondering what kind of place he worked for, that we had so little support and contact for him or whatever. You never know what people, what trials they carry.
Yeah.
And I promise you that people that work for you carry things that are a lot more serious than what you have going on in your life, most likely. So it's very important, if you want to be an effective leader and if you want to be trusted and somebody that is sought after, it's very important that you're very self-aware about the people that work for you, about yourself and the people that work for you, and that you take time to invest to find out who they are.
And our second guest on this podcast, if you go back, Andrew DeHaan, that's his model, right? Is care. You got to care first.
Well, that assistant manager went on to own several businesses. We still talk.
Nice.
That's been years. We've even talked about doing something in partnership. So, maybe I was able to recover from that landmine. But it's really important because the same way that you can work with somebody for a decade very closely and find out that they have something serious going on in their life, it's the same situation that you're going to be in today.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's empathy from his side of understanding that he knew that you cared, but your behaviors maybe just weren't showing it with the questions that you're asking. But he did know who you were in that situation.
Yeah, and he probably took pity on the job I was in and how big it was, like that. Like you said, he's more empathetic than I am.
Yeah.
In that position. So, and his wife is slowly passing away. So that was an eye opener for me. Maybe one of the best eye openers that I've had.
Yeah, and it is another good reminder that sometimes we lock in on judgment mode because our minds are driven that way. And I've had to talk myself through these moments where I'll start to maybe get frustrated with somebody. And then I always like to ask the question, what do I know for sure about what they're thinking and what they know? Do they know? And so this is where it's not always on the leader. Sometimes it's just it's always on ourselves first. And it's kind of like, have you made this person aware as you're frustrated with them? Now, obviously, in your case earlier, when you said you have to go for a family emergency, then that person knew when they were firing you. But I mean, sometimes it goes a little bit deeper. But it's interesting that 20 years ago, we weren't using the word empathy that often,
Right.
but we knew what it was. We knew what it felt like, and I think now we've just labeled it as this is number 3 on your list, and you're kind of going them in order, but they all kind of go together, right? And this is not an option. And whether you're a Christian or what kind of a faith you have, but just as out of kindness, it's just good. I mean, it makes you feel good when you can connect with others and help each other get through this. Because you're right, everyone's got something we're dealing with.
I can recall through the decades, I guess. We grew up, we had personal problems, and then we had problems with our kids. And now my generation is having problems with their parents. And so the people that work for you are in the same boat, right? And they are going through those same evolutions. And the problems with children and teenagers today are much different than when my kids were small, right? It's much more hazardous. It's much more challenging. And the problems with parents have become, much more challenging, I think. And the people that work for you are struggling with those things. And then, of course, you have the issue of personal relationships and divorce. All those things, people, unless you have a relationship with them, you're never going to know them. So they're going to be out of work or subperforming or whatever. You're going to be frustrated and tied up in your own little world, and you're going to miss the opportunity to save the person and to develop the person. And then you're going to have to replace the person. And then you're going to have to start all over.
So we can't just focus on making parts?
It's just it's a question of human efficiency.
Yeah.
Do you want to spend your time pulling your hair out trying to find people and train them, or do you want to invest in your people?
I love
With
it.
a little bit of investment, they can really admire you, respect you, and seek you out.
Bring it home, John. What's our last one?
Last one, and that to me is challenge. And I wrap up challenge by a person being able to say the words. And I'm not talking about texting them, and I'm not talking about emailing them. I'm talking about looking somebody in the eye and saying the words. Those can be good words. Those can be challenge words. But I wrapped up challenge as being able to say the words. So people have to be able to see your face. I know the whole let's wear a mask and 2 masks and a face shield, I feel has kind of damaged not just our kids' ability to converse with each other and to grow emotionally, but I think it's also made it convenient for leaders to be less visible. And I don't mean less visible because they're wearing a mask. I'm saying because of COVID, everybody's got a mask on and there's so much to do that leaders are less visible. So if you've ever worked with somebody that walked around tired and defeated, if you've ever worked for somebody that you never saw, think about those persons. Were you inspired? Did you want to jump up and do more, or did you want to get by the day and do as little as possible? And maybe you're the type of person that always wants to do more, but most people aren't. And most people, if they're working for a leader who's beat up, a person who's not all in, a person that doesn't have a smile on their face, and a person that's not asking questions, a person that's not rewarding victory, a person that's not challenging real problems. If you're not actively challenging your members and doing those things, they're not going to take on any additional challenge for you. It's one of the worst things I think a leader can do is just be consumed by the business. I've talked about this several times because I've been in several roles that I felt consumed me. And it was a convenient excuse not to be a more effective leader, I guess.
So why do you call this one challenge?
I call it challenge because if a leader can't if a leader can't say the words to motivate people, if he can't tell people when they're doing something wrong, I don't mean scold them, tell them what they're doing wrong, help them get back on course. If you can't challenge a company or an organization to grow, challenge to me is a lot of different things, but it's being able to be on board and say the words. And without it, you can be a lot of things to be a great leader. Let's think about, current events. I don't want to be political. We've got a war going on in Europe.
Yes, we do.
You've got a man who's the leader of one country, another country's getting ready to clobber him, and, the United States offers the guy a ride out of town so he's not killed, and he says, "I need ammunition, not a ride." Now, President Zelensky, I don't know him from Adam. I've never heard of him before this war started. But I can see very quickly that there's a country of people that are following the man because he's seen as an effective leader, and he's able to step up to the challenge. And he's able to challenge people. You've got old women making Molotov cocktails, getting ready to throw them at a tank. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Now, what would happen in the country, and I don't know what the outcome of Ukraine is, and I don't know if it's any different, but I do know that there's 45 million people in the Ukraine that are looking to their leader as a true leader, and they're following him, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. And if that means standing in front of a 40-mile column of tanks, that's what they're doing. And it's very impressive to me. What would happen if the man had said, "Okay, get me out of town"?
Yeah.
The country would have folded. This would have been over in 12 hours.
What's your legacy?
His legacy is going to be that he was effective, he was empathetic. He's talking about his people. He's imploring to the world to help him, and he's not talking about his oligarchs. He's talking about the men and women and children of his country. He's stepping up to the challenge. He's standing in front of the world saying, "Hey, we've got vulnerabilities. We're going to stand in and fight, but we've got vulnerabilities." So he's humble. And I don't know who he is. I don't know about his personal integrity, but from everything I can see, he's humble. He does what he says, right? He's down in the trench wearing body armor, whatever. Obviously empathetic about what's going on to his country, and he's been able to step up to the challenge. So, again, I'm not suggesting that this is ideal, because Lord knows this is a terrible situation. But on one hand, you have a leader that people are following, and they're following because he's a leader. And the side that's invading, people are following because they have to. They don't even know why they're there, some of them. They're scared to death, and their options are probably do what I was told to do, or go to jail or something worse. So, you've got a legacy on one side because he's a leader. You got a legacy on the other side because he's not, and time will tell.
Yeah.
How are these people remembered?
John, that's powerful. I didn't look at it quite that way you articulated it. And that's a real life event, not a manufacturing issue.
And it's not staged, right? It's not part of a class.
No. And we understand that behaviors are so important. I just came from a conference this weekend, and Phil M. Jones wrote the book, Exactly What to Say. And his slogan is, change your words, change the world. And it's very powerful in how we speak and how we can become lazy in how we challenge, because you know what? I can send a text and I can just do that, or I'll just shoot off an email. And what I'm hearing from you is what this, because I had a hard time understanding challenge didn't really seem to go with the other three, but now I get it. And the fact of you got to be willing to say those words, and you got to be able to say it and look in the whites of the eyes.
If you can't be on point, and because people are going to see who you are. So if you can't be on point and be in front of them, and being able to say the words and be on board and recognize success and challenge failure, then the rest of being a leader doesn't matter. And, in a couple of days, I think the entire world, maybe with the exception of the invading force, sees a leader. They didn't know him before. But because he's able to do and say and be who he said he is, he's being able to say the words. He's not doing it from some bunker in Acapulco, right? He's down in a trench in downtown Ukraine. So
for the listeners that have their own worlds, their own family concerns, like you described, and they're going into a manufacturing plant and they heard this today, what's the one message you want them to remember from John Raymer?
Well, to coin your phrase, I would say change your words and maybe change how you're seen as a leader, because people see who you really are, even if you can't.
I love it. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Love being here.
Hey, folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.